Fans of Ryakishi 7's oeuvre have likely been initiated by way of 7th expansion's two most popular titles, Higurashi and Umineko, with the more recent Kikonya rounding out the When They Cry line of games that serve as the studio's flagship franchise. But what fewer fans are aware of is that Ryakishi's name is also attached to a small catalog of titles external to When They Cry, a collection which this video hopes to shed some light on, as there are more than a few underrated gems lurking among them that warrant your time and attention. We won't cover every single production that Ryakishi and his creative team have had a hand in over the years, but rather, enough of the major ones up until the date of this posting. First up, the visual novel Ookami Kakushi, a collaboration between Ryakishi 7 and entertainment behemoth Konami, featuring character designs by manga group Peach Pit, of Rosen Maiden, Diazu, and Shugo Kara fame. The VN was released in 2009 for the PSP, with an anime adaptation airing in early 2010. Ookami Kakushi, meaning wolfed away, doesn't shy away from its intentions to chase after the success of Higurashi, with the story following Hiroshi Kuzumi, who has recently relocated to a town nestled far away in the mountains, and finds himself struggling to acclimate with its arcane customs and traditions. As Hiroshi digs more into the local superstition and folklore, he discovers a connection between them and a rash of mysterious disappearances, prompting him to dig deeper into the unsettling truth behind former residents of the town who are described as having abruptly, quote-unquote, moved away. Given such an eerily familiar setup, naturally, Higurashi fans will find themselves in very comfortable territory, but I would append the caveat that Ookami Kakushi is generally considered to be at least a step down or two in terms of quality from Higurashi, with Ryakishi having less direct creative control over the scenario. The Ookami Kakushi anime has been licensed by Sentai Filmworks for a Western release, with the original visual novel currently unlicensed. Higanbana no Saku Yoru ni, which translates to The Night the Red Spider Lily Blooms, is a manga released between 2010 and 2012 by Ryakishi 7, and adapted into visual novel format in 2011 by 7th expansion. Following the trend started by Ookami Kakushi, Higanbana is tonally similar to Higurashi by nature of it being deeply psychological and atmospheric horror, anchored by a setting overflowing with ominous mysteries, but differs in several key aspects. Unlike Higurashi and its singular, overarching narrative, Higanbana is a mostly episodic tale, released in the form of standalone arcs, each told from the perspective of a different protagonist, and revolving around the strange and occult goings-on at an unnamed high school. Bullying serves as Higanbana's thematic foundation, and its resultant deep-seated psychological trauma is the driving factor for almost all of the disturbing conflicts that unfold throughout each self-contained vignette. The first story, for instance, focuses on the meek and timid Mari Moriya, the target of rampant abuse by her fellow classmates, and who seeks help from her teacher, only to be made into the victim of his own twisted fantasies. Backed into a corner, she turns to one of the resident yokai that haunt the grounds, the titular Higanbana, giving Mari the option of enacting revenge on those who had wronged her in exchange for her own soul. Higanbana's provocative and at times unflinchingly dark and gritty subject matter, haunting tone and atmosphere, and nuanced character dynamics make it a reasonably solid recommendation for fans coming off the Higurashi train. Higanbana was briefly available via Manga Gamer for the Western world, leveraging translation group Spider Lily's English patch. Rewrite is a fantasy romance visual novel developed by Key, released in 2011, and follows the story of Kotaro Tennoji, a student at an environmentally conscious high school who possesses the superhuman ability to restructure his physical characteristics. At the behest of one of his classmates, Kotaro is inducted into the school's occult research club, investigating an array of perplexing supernatural mysteries alongside a handful of heroines who make up Rewrite's branching routes. Ryakishi's contribution to Rewrite is via the route for one of these heroines, class representative Lucia Konohana, and it sure does show as the narrative delves into all too familiar territory, from shadowy organizations to morally questionable human experimentation. Out of all the entries on this list, Rewrite is the most worth diving into as a broad recommendation, even if you're not necessarily a fan of key works such as Clannad. While Rewrite very much leans on the slice-of-life elements that typify the key titles, it differs by bringing the historically latent supernatural elements, i.e. key magic, right to the forefront, in addition to evolving the narrative from a more or less standard adolescent romance drama to a captivating occult mystery and urban fantasy thriller, full of genuine intrigue and surprisingly stellar action, the likes of which is generally well outside of Key's wheelhouse. Rewrite is licensed by Sakai Project for a Western release, and also sports a 12-episode anime which aired in 2016, though, as with most visual novel adaptations, the latter is very much not recommended due to its heavily compressed nature. Rosegundays is a completely original work by 7th Expansion, and is the most radical departure from their set of flagship IPs. Instead of staying the course with horror mystery, Rosegundays is a vibrant and lighthearted action-oriented romp, taking place in an alternate history version of Japan, where the country's surrender in World War II leads to occupation by both China and America. Coupled with an enduring uptick in organized crime, the Japanese are relegated to a marginalized population, even on their own sovereign soil. The story kicks off when nightclub owner Rose Higanbana is saved from a kidnapping by Leo Shishigami, a downtrodden but charismatic and hyper-competent misfit, and promptly enlists him as a bodyguard to aid her in her mission. To ascend the ranks of the underworld and create a refuge removed from the walls of society, one that preserves the national identity of her ostracized countrymen, a haven where they may rebuild their lives in peace. Rosegundays is the ultimate palate cleanser, top to bottom. While it retains 7th Expansion's hallmark engaging character dynamics, it sports combat-oriented minigames and a more streamlined, straightforward, and broadly accessible narrative, against a cacophonous, stylish, jazz-fueled backdrop of mobster-ridden organized crime and political drama. An English patch by Witch Hunt is available for the PC release for Western fans. Hotarubi no Tomoru Koroni, translated as When the Fireflies Glow, is a manga released between 2015 and 2018 by Rikishi 7. Of note is that Hotarubi takes place in the same universe as Higurashi and Umineko, with an umineko-centered side story serving as the official prologue to Hotarubi, and with an alternative universe version of Mio Takano serving as one of the main characters. Hotarubi is more or less Rikishi's foray into the realm of classic survival horror, with our central cast, the Taramura family, finding themselves inexplicably cut off from the outside world in the remote village of Hirasaka, named after the gateway to the underworld, with reality slowly unraveling around them in increasingly terrifying and bone-chilling ways. Like Ookami Kakushi, it liberally borrows cues from Higurashi, but execution-wise, Hotarubi feels sorely underdeveloped and rushed, both thematically and with regard to the depth of its characters. Higurashi fans with a soft spot for survival horror may find Hotarubi worth checking out, given its extreme brevity at only 22 chapters. But those going in expecting the sojourn in Buddhist hell to be a thought-provoking and engrossing mystery will likely leave underwhelmed. The manga is currently unlicensed, though fan translations are available online. Helmed by Rikishi 7 and 7th Expansion and released in 2016, Trianthology Sanmenkyou no Kuni no Alice, translated to Alice in the Land of the Three-Sided Mirror, is a visual novel collaboration reuniting Rikishi and 2 other scenario writers whom he previously worked with for Rewrite, Romeo Tanaka, scenario writer for Cross Channel, and Yuto Tonokawa, who also contributed to Little Busters. While Trianthology doesn't take place in the same universe as When They Cry, the concept of witches and fragments have transferred over and remain fundamentally the same. The story of Trianthology follows the titular Alice, the Witch of Gutting, and her journey across 3 fragments at the behest of her friend, Usagi, 2 of which are centered on high school antics and drama, and the last of which centers on a conflict between humanity and a race of extraterrestrials in the year 2438. Trianthology is known for being an exceptionally quirky, borderline art house production of a visual novel, principally from a compositional standpoint. And as with most experimental works, it can come off as needlessly gimmicky at times, and generally hit and miss when it comes to overall quality. Trianthology is currently untranslated at the time of this recording. Iwaihime is a horror mystery visual novel that carries the distinction of being the only title written mainly by Rikishi 7 that is not a 7th Expansion production, as it was developed and published by DMM Games in 2016. The plot follows Suzumu Susuhara, who has recently transferred to a new school, whereupon he is expressly warned to keep his distance from the aloof Toei Kawakami, always seen clutching a creepy doll. Naturally, our protagonist ignores this warning and decides to reach out and connect with Kawakami, and in doing so, unwittingly finds himself the target of a curse that threatens to consume everyone and everything within reach. Iwaihime is known for routinely dipping into surreal horror, with its cheery, school-centric slice-of-life facade peppered with out-of-left-field nightmarish interludes, making its overall aesthetic very reminiscent of Denpa. The uniquely stylized character designs serve to greatly amplify the frights, ramping the visceral and grotesque visuals up to 11. As with most of Ryukishi's horror titles, Higurashi fans will find at least something to relate to here, though, again, expectations should be kept in check if comparing the two side by side in terms of overall quality. Iwaihime is currently licensed for the West by Shiravian. Gensō Rōgoku no Kaleidoscope, or Kaleidoscope of Phantom Prison, is a visual novel by 7th Expansion released in 2020. While still very much horror of the psychological variety, gerokasu differs in that it's a straight-up death game format in the vein of Saw. 4 girls trapped in a room where the only means of escape is seemingly via meting out excruciating torture unto the others. As a more recent release, gerokasu is naturally untranslated, though the response thus far has been generally mixed, with criticism being leveled at its short length and its reliance both on shock horror and the outmoded, sensationalist gimmick of cutesy girls being subjected to bouts of inhumane violence. Finally, a decade after rewrite, Ryukishi 7 and Ki decided to team up once again in 2021 with the visual novel Loopers. In an interview with online magazine Visual Styles, Ryukishi claims that he was tapped by Ki for this project as his expertise in horror, looping narratives, and all-around unpredictability would aid in spicing up the more conventional, no-frills Ki formula. Loopers is a mystery thriller that centers on a group of teenage geocachers who, while out treasure hunting one day, find themselves swallowed up in a time vortex, forced to live and relive the same day ad infinitum, a la Groundhog Day. Stumbling upon others who are also trapped in this endlessly repeating purgatory, they band together to find a way out. The game is currently planned for an English release. And that concludes our trip through Ryukishi 7 and 7th Expansion's lesser-known catalog of titles. If any of these have piqued your interest, feel free to give it a shot. And as always, thanks for watching.